Good afternoon. I'm Danielle Conway. You're watching Life in the Law on the ThinkTech series. I am very happy to bring to you a wonderful colleague and friend, Melissa Pavlicek. She is the owner of a business called Hawaii Public Policy Advocates, and they are a lobbying firm, but also they advise charitable organizations. I want to talk today to Melissa just about what charitable organizations do, what are their objectives, and how can lawyers assist or create charitable organizations for the benefit of the community.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks for having me. I love talking about nonprofit organizations, and charitable organizations are very close to my heart, so thanks for having me.
You do great work. You have actually a stable of charitable organizations that you shepherd from start to finish in terms of their goals and objectives. You help them get started, you help them run, you help them achieve their purpose. So how did you even come to that realization that this is what you wanted to do with your law degree?
I actually didn't invent it or think of it myself, but I was working at a law firm, and I loved the firm that I was working at, but I found myself really doing a lot of government affairs work. I had worked at the legislature, and I really thought that the way to make an impact for our state was to be a lobbyist and be an advocate at the Capitol. And I found out that many of my clients did not want to go up to the Capitol and testify on bills on the old adage that the nail that sticks its head up gets hammered down. They wanted to go up in other organizations like the Chamber of Commerce or their trade organizations, and they like to be in groups. And I noticed many times the trade organization would come to me and they didn't have an executive director. Nobody was taking the minutes or running the meetings or posting anything. Around the same time, and this is about 10 years ago, the state attorney general was looking into the operations of many organizations and questioning whether they were being run properly or truly for the public interest. And so having a lawyer serve as their executive director solved many of their needs and the desire to be more process-oriented, have better documentation. So
now, Melissa, I've watched you run a meeting. You can run a meeting. And like you said, you started this more than a decade ago. How did you come to know that you could do this kind of sophisticated high-level management? Because you're managing more than one organization. You're managing multiple organizations. How'd you know you could do that?
You know, I had the luxury of having a wonderful first nonprofit as my client, and it was referred to me by the attorneys at the law firm I worked at. So it's great to have colleagues and friends who refer work to you, and I still enjoy that to this day. But it was an HR trade organization called the Society for Human Resource Management. And these are HR and human resource professionals, 1,000 of them right here in Hawaii, who have one organization. And they ran it strictly by volunteers, and some of the volunteers would give 20, 30, 40 hours a week just to their nonprofit. So I had not only the luxury of having a great organization and a good board, very active, but some of the best trainers out there. And it plugged me into a national organization, and many of the state directors or chapter directors for other SHRMs in other states had people who did many organizations. I'm like, why don't we do that here in Hawaii? We have high labor costs. We have a need, because of this Attorney General scrutiny, to have more documentation and better run meetings and things like that. We could do that here. And so it really grew from there.
So it actually seems fair to say that the Society of Human Resource Management sort of led the way for other charitable organizations to benefit from your expertise.
Absolutely. I think for sure, as far as I'm concerned, and shortly after starting my company, my husband decided he wanted to join me too, because we found there were so many organizations that wanted to come, and the thought of turning them away to sit in our jobs that weren't as compelling and as fulfilling as this work, didn't make sense.
So the title of this show is called Versatility of Legal Education and the Profession. So how would you, in a nutshell, describe what you've been able to transform in terms of a profession for you as a lawyer?
I think that being a lawyer gives you so many great skills in problem solving. And if you are a good problem solver, whether it's in an academic setting, in a law firm, or in a private sector for nonprofits or for-profit companies, you'll be successful. And so I really look at my job, and my husband Steve is also a lawyer and a graduate of the UH Law School as well. We try to take our legal skills and apply them to the nonprofit sector and help them navigate the complex compliance rules that are now in place so they can further their mission. Because really that's what it's all about, is helping the nonprofits do their mission.
Right. Now, you mentioned you and your husband are graduates of the William S. Richardson School of
Yes.
Law. We are very happy about that. We're very proud of our alumni. Tell me, when you were thinking about your legal education, did you in any way think that you would be helping to create these kinds of charitable organizations that are thriving in Hawaii?
Absolutely not. And I often talk to law students now or lawyers who aren't quite sure what they really want to be doing, and I think you have to try things. And you don't have to do the same thing. You know, I tried being a litigator and I barely lasted a year. It wasn't my thing. I did business transactions after that for over 5 years. But those experiences all led me to put it together and work with nonprofits. I had a public relations background before becoming a lawyer, so public relations, working at the Capitol, and some of these legal skills all really came together nicely.
So that's where we get this idea of versatility. You don't have to give up on what you've learned from a prior career experience or what you love to do outside of legal education. You can actually meld the two.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what makes it the most rewarding, feeling that you're not leaving a chunk of yourself or your arm or your leg on the doorstep. You're bringing it all together and putting it to use, not just for yourself or to make money, but for the community, and feel like you're going to have some kind of legacy. I think that's what's exciting.
And that's why we at the law school are very proud of alumni like yourself and alumni like your husband. But what I want to talk about today is how should people in the community think about nonprofit organizations? How should they think about building one, and what should these organizations do? And what should these organizations think about getting someone else to do so that they are successful?
You know, there's about as many different types of nonprofits as there are people or ideas, and so there's no one size fits all. But I kind of group them into two big categories, and like I said, the trade organizations do a lot of government affairs, lobbying, and advocacy. You've been asking more about the charitable organizations, and these are organizations where the donor will get a tax exemption.
Right.
And those are really meaningful and important. They are providing such an important service in our economy and in our community. But in return, you have to be very scrupulous in how you account for the money, how you report it, what kinds of compliance rules you're familiar with, and things like that. So why I think we've been successful in working with those organizations is the people who want to start a nonprofit primarily and usually are driven by the mission and the desire to do good.
Right.
They are not thinking about keeping minutes or keeping a file for 7 years about what checks they wrote, you know, things like that. So we can take some of the administrative burden off of them and allow them to focus on their mission. One of my favorite books was written by the American Society of Association Executives, and it's called The 7 Measures of Success, and it's about nonprofits and what they need to do to go from good to great nonprofits. And the Society for Human Resource Management was featured in that book, and it really talks about being data-driven and mission-driven, mission-centric, not just what the people involved in the organization want, but like relentlessly holding up your mission and saying, are we really doing it?
Interesting. So you started with SHRM. They have this mission that has obviously been recognized as stellar by those who are evaluating nonprofits. What are some of these 7
measures of success.
Yeah.
So as I mentioned, data-driven is one of them. So you're constantly asking yourself, did people come to our programs?
Okay.
Danielle, you work often with the Hawaii Procurement Institute. So we're asking ourselves at the end of a program, did people come? Did they really understand what we were trying to accomplish with this program? What did the evaluation say? Were they willing to pay for the program? Did we get sponsors? Those kinds of questions. Some of the other things that the book talks about are organizational. Do you have the right people doing the right things? Are you offering the right products and services? And it's not so much that the mission can never be changed. It's just asking yourself, are you really serving it with any new idea that comes along? Because many times nonprofits will get an influx of new people, great new ideas, and sometimes we'll lose track or lose focus of why were we here in the first place. Do we need to change the mission is another part of that book.
So one factor that may actually stymie a nonprofit is that they lose sight of their mission.
Mission drift, taking on too many things.
Taking on too many things.
Yeah, not building a culture where the board members or the key volunteers know why they're there. Onboarding board members and really bringing them up to speed on what has been the past practice.
So when you're bringing new leadership into an already existing organization, what are the things that you should look for in those new leaders? And I'm particularly thinking about graduating law students. What should a law student who's graduating, who doesn't want to go the law firm route, but who might want to either start a nonprofit or go into a nonprofit, what should that person be thinking? What should the nonprofit be thinking about that person?
I mean, there's so many skills that law students have, whether they recognize it or not, but they're definitely organized, they have analytical skills, strong reading and writing skills, presentation skills. One of the biggest things that I think law school teaches you, if not taking the bar exam, is how to manage your stress. So having a process and being very deliberate and conscientious about undertaking any activity. So if we say we're going to have a meeting or a workshop, we don't just like throw it out there on a date. We think through what else is on the agenda, what else is out in the community, who are the target audiences, what is the message we want to communicate in the invitation, what color is the envelope, everything, being very thoughtful and deliberate. And I think those are some of the skills you learn in law school. You might not realize them, or you might not remember or know how to apply them to the nonprofit sector, but I guarantee you they're there. You just have to sort of unearth all the things that you learned in kindergarten, let alone law school, right? Yes, the sandbox.
So one last question before we go to break. When you are directing or helping these nonprofits with their management, do they know that they're part of a collective? Do they know that you have other responsibilities?
And so one of our strengths has been with organizations that are just transitioning from all volunteer and they haven't taken the step to hire a full-time person. They can work with our staff and they don't have to get those employment costs. And they know we are working with other organizations. And some choose to have one person working 80 hours a week in the back. And some of the current nonprofits that we had used that model until they burned out the second person, the third person, the fourth person, and then they come to us. So sometimes we have to work with them, educate them, and wait for them to experience that, and then see if they are interested in working with us later.
So I told a little bit of a fib because you made me want to ask one more question about this. So when you're in that transition phase, or when the nonprofit is in that transition phase, do they finally come to some realization that this is going to assist them in moving forward on a substantive or mission-driven path, as opposed to, some people like doing the day-to-day work?
In my experience, the people will, many times board members will want to do it themselves because they have a passion for it. But when they realize they can put all of that passion into the subject matter of the nonprofit and not have to do the newsletter, the website, scheduling the webinar, getting the liquor license for the golf tournament,
Right.
and things like that, they are very, very relieved. So it's really a communications exercise in letting them know what we can do to take off with them.
Excellent. Well, you're watching Life in the Law. I'm Danielle Conway. We're going to take a 1-minute break.
I'm Jay Fidell. That's Sharon Moriwaki of the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum. And every Wednesday we have Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy. We've been doing it for some time now, and we have some fantastic guests on there, unbelievable guests who give us insight into what is going on in a very complex, sometimes very confusing, sometimes very disappointing area of progress in the state. So we love doing this. We love meeting them. We love talking to them. We love having their ideas out on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we can all make some sense of what's going on. Sharon, what do you think?
I think that's absolutely correct. We enjoy ourselves meeting with all these people and hearing about the energy and the state of clean energy, and hopefully we advance clean energy for the state. So it's terrific. Join us. Come
Okay,
join
it's
us.
every Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday is Energy Day. Every
Energy
Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Hawaii, the State of Clean Energy, here on ThinkTech Hawaii.
Energy
We'll see you
Wednesday.
there.
Welcome back to Life in the Law. I'm Danielle Conway, and my guest is Melissa Pavlicek. She is the owner of Hawaii Public Policy Advocates. She works with charitable organizations as they stand up and get ready to do work for the community in Hawaii and beyond. Melissa, I want to touch on something that we talked about in the last segment. Law students, like yourself, may not want to go to a law firm. So what is the reality of trying to establish a nonprofit as a first professional endeavor? What should that law student or professional student think about in creating a nonprofit?
I mean, there's so many things to do before you would jump in and start a nonprofit. You would want to explore, are there other nonprofits currently doing that mission? We have thousands of nonprofits in Hawaii, and the charitable organizations are registered with the State Attorney General's office. There's a fabulous website on the state Hawaii.gov website where you can look them all up and find out what their annual revenues are, and a lot of good detailed information there. We also have a couple trade organizations that you would want to join or explore, at least go to meetings. The Hawaii Alliance for Nonprofit Organizations, HANO, is a wonderful resource for many, many nonprofits, and it even posts jobs for nonprofit executive directors. So a way to get your toe in, even as a student, a college student, whether you're a lawyer or a law student or not, would be to explore that. And earlier I mentioned the American Society for Association Executives. They have fabulous resources even if you're not a member on the internet. So before starting your own organization, you would want to build your skills and knowledge and familiarity with the nonprofit sector so that you really go in with your eyes open and know some of the challenges. But if you do have a passion and you see that nobody else is doing it, I think a few key things you would want to think about are finding good legal counsel who can help you get the paperwork in. You don't have to be a lawyer to turn in your IRS information, but advice would be highly beneficial.
Right.
You would want to develop or find a core group of leaders to be with you, because starting a nonprofit solely by yourself is not going to be sustainable. You need several other people to be on your board and to have a shared vision, to be that calibration so you know you're not just winging off and doing something completely. If you can't convince 2 other people that what you're doing is important for
Right.
the community, you're probably not in a good place.
Right. So you should think more deeply
Right.
about this
Figure that
particular
out a bit.
venture. So if that person were to say, I have done the due diligence, I have looked out there, and
There's a need.
There's a need. There's this thing out there. What types of things are going to be important for success? Is there public relations? Is there fundraising? What's going to make sure that that effort is a success?
You know, again, I say there's no one size fits all, because being a successful educational nonprofit might be one path, and being in a successful foundation or fundraising organization for others might be a different path, but it's really trying to marry up what is your vision, what are you trying to serve with what your resources and capabilities are. So if there's a mismatch or a disconnect there, you want to say your mission is to serve the parents of dyslexic children, and you have not talked to a single family with dyslexic children, that's not going to be very realistic. So I think just getting a good strategic plan for engaging others and going forward, what do you want to hope to accomplish?
And as you said, part of that starts with convincing volunteers to join on to your effort.
Right.
Interesting. So another question I have for you about this creation of a nonprofit. Do the nonprofits themselves have responsibilities? You mentioned the IRS, you mentioned getting your status. What are the responsibilities of a nonprofit to the community?
I mean, the definition of a nonprofit is really in the Internal Revenue Code, and often when I talk to people about starting their nonprofits, I bust out that IRS code, and it's about that big. But you're asking donors to give your organization money. In exchange, they do not have to pay tax on that money, so they're getting an exemption, and the government expects something in return. They expect that something good will happen, that if not for that organization, government spending would have to take care of it. So there's very specific enumerated missions that would be approved to get this tax exempt status. So that would be educational, religious, and those types of items. And often, you know, we'll throw around the specific section in the IRS code, 501c3. Those are the charitable organizations, and they have to meet a specific test. Now, there are other organizations that form loosely formed alliances. They're not formed as a true charitable organization. They don't enjoy tax exempt status. You can still operate, have a club, have a friendship with your peers and do good in the community. But if you want that IRS tax exempt status, then you need to follow certain procedures, and one of those is getting a letter from the IRS that said, we have reviewed your documents and it is okay with us. Right,
and that's that all-important 501c3 designation. I've worked with a number of nonprofit organizations that have the 501c3 designation, and the one thing that I have found is that people are so mission-driven in these organizations that they don't actually understand how much value they're giving out. Have you come across your client base where they have not even been able to calculate the value that they've put in the organization? And what harm, if any, comes from the failure to calculate that value?
I mean, I think it goes to what we were talking about a few minutes ago about people getting burned out. They often will be so committed to their mission, and if they are not truly capturing or calculating the value and the time that they're putting in, they might feel they can't do it anymore and not really be able to articulate how to fill that need. So if you didn't realize you were going 20 hours a week or on developing a curriculum to do a program, and then suddenly you're gone, the organization is going to stumble or not be sustainable. So I think the harm in not valuing it properly or capturing the time that the volunteers are giving it is that you impair the organization's ability to go forward when you can't do that anymore. And people have competing demands. Volunteers are unique in how you work with them. You can't give them a job description and say, if you don't do it, you're fired.
You sure can.
Right. You need to, you know, it's like little grains of bread and having the little birdies come to you. You know, it's like really working with people to foster their relationship and bring them closer to the organization and to make them sing and make the organization keep moving.
Well, I might be getting into an area of confidential information, but could you share how many people are on your client list?
Well, right now we serve as the executive director for 5 nonprofit organizations, and we have a number of other lobbying clients where we're not the executive director. And some are very small. So a 501c3 we work with supports the law enforcement activities and community outreach for a law enforcement organization, and we have a very small budget of under $20,000 a year. But we also have the larger organizations like the Society for Human Resource Management with over 1,000 members right in Hawaii. So really different scale.
Right. And then, but that keeps you more than fully employed. And so what you're saying is there's room for competition, if you will.
Absolutely, and growth. I mean, we have 5 employees in addition to my husband and myself, and so we have somebody who can do the newsletter and the website, who can schedule meetings for us and get speakers, and who knows how to run a golf tournament if we need to do some fundraising. So we have been able to grow our business and employ others, including some lawyers now and then, who really want to help work in the nonprofit sector. But there are other consultants out there who do the work that we do as well. So we see them from time to time, and nowhere near the number of nonprofit management companies that we would see in the mainland. But I think there's definitely opportunity here.
And so do you think that starting a organization or entity like yours can be a lucrative career opportunity?
I don't think managing nonprofits will ever enrich anyone beyond, line their pocketbook.
Sure.
But it could definitely have a very rewarding, fulfilling, and economically advantageous career. And I think that, to me, what I see as a real opportunity is to have nonprofit management companies like ours that specialize in a sector. So we have different nonprofits in different sectors because we are doing a lot of legislative work, and we don't want to crash into each other at the Capitol. So we're specifically spreading out. We might work with nurses here or law enforcement here. They're not working on the same issues.
Right.
But I think there is really a lot of room for someone to say, I am going to be the nonprofit executive director for 5 health and human services organizations or 3 mental health organizations, because you can really develop your expertise, and then the organizations get a lot of leveraging and benefits from the relationships, and that's so important.
Interesting. So when we talk about the nonprofit, and you mentioned that, for example, the IRS code has different designations, what makes a nonprofit different than a for-profit business? What makes the mission development any different?
I mean, you can have some commonalities, but the difference really is that you are not doing the business to make money. You are doing the business to serve one of these governmentally approved purposes. And so your mindset when you run a nonprofit is, are we furthering that mission? Because if we're not, we either need to be paying tax on the activity, like selling cookies or selling shirts, or we're jeopardizing our tax exempt status. So maybe we need to set up a for-profit company to do this other activity.
I see. So a nonprofit can operate at a surplus, but then it's how that surplus
is it being used to further the mission.
Exactly. Okay.
So you could have a for-profit company that's not making very much money, but that doesn't make it a nonprofit. And you can have a nonprofit that makes quite a bit of money, but as long as it's furthering the mission, I think your goal and your focus, your approach, your strategy is very different.
And so that's important when you start talking about fundraising, because you're actually then fundraising for that specific mission or those specific objectives that are outlined.
And that's fundraising is only going to be as successful as your ability to communicate the mission, because people are not going to give a nonprofit money just to keep it going unless it's tied to the good work or some good work that you want to do or you can show that you will do.
Gotcha. So can you talk to me a little bit more about Hano? I've seen them around. I've seen a couple of presentations that Hano makes. They actually are a trade association that represents the nonprofits here in Hawaii.
Yes.
Do they also do some representational work on the mainland and in Washington, D.C. that helps us in Hawaii?
They affiliate with a national organization, and they facilitate a lot of communications from the national organization. But what I love about Hano is every nonprofit board and executive director is so busy doing their own mission that often we're not up at the state legislature watching things that affect all of us, such as tax issues, or are we going to have to report and be taxed on our revenue from doing a trade show or an exhibition or something like that. So Hano can fill in and do some advocacy that's in common for all of the organizations.
Excellent. Okay. Well, this is Danielle Conway. You are watching Life in the Law in the ThinkTech Talk series. We'll be back in a moment.
Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell. This is ThinkTech Hawaii, broadcasting live from the Pioneer Plaza in downtown Honolulu. We raise public awareness about tech, energy, and globalism in Hawaii. Technology is critical to our state. A vibrant tech sector will give us new prospects in the global marketplace and will offer great careers and make our economy more resilient. Streaming live on Ustream and Spreaker, ThinkTech allows its hosts and guests invaluable opportunities to report important events and discuss important questions, and to be heard here in Hawaii and around the world. You can find links to our live streams on thinktechhawaii.com or on our mobile website, m.thinktechhawaii.com. And you can see our archive on YouTube. It's all just a click away. We want to do whatever we can to keep Hawaii relevant, connected, and thriving in the complexity of the 21st century. We hope you will help us in those efforts. Tune in today. This is ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. Mahalo.
Welcome back. You are watching Life in the Law, and I'm Danielle Conway. My guest is Melissa Pavlicek of Hawaii Public Policy Advocates. We're talking today about nonprofits and charitable organizations, and we're getting great information from Melissa. Hey, let's turn to the politics. So I always think about legislative lobbying as politics. And so that makes me...
Well, that makes you different from the IRS.
Okay.
It's a little bit different.
Okay.
So let's talk about that, because it's really
Yeah.
important. I think nonprofits feel that they aren't allowed to do any legislative advocacy, and it's not true.
Okay.
So for charitable organizations, they are allowed to do advocacy, legislative lobbying. It has to be an insubstantial amount compared to their overall total budget. And there are some very specific IRS rules about that. And the reason is really that you're getting a tax exemption for the money. So you can't turn around and use all of it to lobby the legislature.
I see.
But you can do a little bit. So you can voice your concerns about a bill. You can go up and testify at the Capitol. You have to capture how much time and money you're spending on that and make sure that it is a small enough amount that it does not overshadow or become a substantial amount of your budget. And there are some specific IRS forms you can fill out to get a little more room beyond the scope of what we need to talk about. But politics is different, and so nonprofit organizations are absolutely prohibited from doing political activities. So that means no endorsing candidates,
Okay.
no sign waving, no wearing a campaign t-shirt. But you definitely can go up to the legislature and advocate on a bill. One of the unique things we're facing this year in 2014 in Hawaii is we have a constitutional amendment to allow for funding for early learning. And many nonprofits, especially preschools that are run by nonprofit organizations, want to participate on that. Normally, something on a ballot would be a candidate, and nonprofits can't do that.
Right.
But interestingly enough, in terms of the IRS, they will look at lobbying on a constitutional amendment much like they look at lobbying at the state capitol. So nonprofits are allowed to do some advocacy on the constitutional amendment. And there are other organizations and entities that are allowed to do more of that. But I think freeing ourselves as nonprofit advocates to speak up is really important. And if the legislature and public policy decision makers don't hear from the nonprofit sector, then decisions won't be made with their interests included. Right, exactly.
So I want to make sure to really clearly understand this, because the law professor in me says that you have to make a distinction. So there's a distinction between legislative advocacy and, say, political activity.
There's actually three things. So political activity would be candidates, people running for office, things that you vote on the ballot.
Okay.
Can't do any of that.
Okay.
Nonprofits,
so
none. No for charitable organizations.
Okay.
For advocacy, lobbying at the Capitol, speaking up on a bill, an actual proposal that the legislature is going to consider, yes, you can do some of that, an insubstantial amount as compared to your overall total budget.
So that makes me think of an analysis on a case-by-case basis. So we'd have to look at your budget, We have to look at the issue, and we have to determine, in comparing those two things, does this qualify for insubstantial?
Absolutely. Your
Okay.
accountant is your friend when you're a nonprofit, because that's important, right? That's how you're
Okay.
going to file your tax return.
Okay.
And then there's a third bucket, which is education. So you can do an unlimited amount of education. For example, our Procurement Institute can talk about procurement law all day long and never have to worry about lobbying, because they're just educating
Oh, I see.
legislators about what the status is of the law.
So when we go up to the legislature and we do our educational programming, that's exactly what we're engaged in. Now, if somebody happens to be persuaded by what we're teaching,
Well, we're not asking for a specific position on a bill, and if we are, then we're in that second bucket, and we're
Okay.
doing very little of that. But yes, and it's not just procurement, of course, it's
everything.
early learning,
That's
it's
right.
religious organizations. Education is always something that they can do.
Gotcha. So in the legislative advocacy portion of this, it's imperative that nonprofits and charitable organizations carve out some time for this, because it's in their self-interest to make sure that the decision makers understand their positions.
Absolutely, and that's something, a realization that I've only come to doing this work, and in the last 10 years I've served on state agency boards where I felt as a board member it wasn't my job to go talk to the legislature.
Right.
We're just there to do whatever
The
the
mission
statute tells
is.
us.
Okay.
And I think that was a huge mistake.
Really?
Because I really feel the legislators, city council members, the governor, people in those important policy decision-making roles, they do not have the capacity or the time,
Just the absolute
to
time.
learn about every
Everything.
single issue. And if we aren't telling them or giving them good information that they can rely on, of course the decisions won't be good.
Right. You know, sometimes in these areas, do you think people suffer from just a crisis of misinformation? Because just like I misquoted or misstated political activity, do you think that there are boards of nonprofits that are out there saying, no, we can't do that? And
Absolutely. In fact, I once wrote an article for the newspaper with another lawyer about nonprofit advocacy. We submitted it to be published in the newspaper, and it was all about being freed up to speak at the legislature, and the headline said, nonprofits can't lobby. And we were like
Wow.
smacking our head, you know,
Wow.
we didn't quite get the message across, or the headline writer didn't read our article very well.
Very
Yeah.
well, exactly. And what this means is misinformation gets out there, and that detracts from the mission of the nonprofit, because they can't go and educate the legislature or advocate according to this insubstantial amount on issues of great import to them.
We're missing out those voices, and I think there are a lot of good advocates, and people do, and I give credit to all of those people who are in decision making, because they do go out of their way to try and get information from wherever they can. It's not only the nonprofit sector,
Right.
but if we have more voices with good information, of course it would be better. Of
Now,
course.
it seems that for-profit businesses always get this cachet of legitimacy when they go somewhere to testify, or they go to...
I'm so interested that you're saying that, because
Yeah.
that's not my experience.
Okay, great.
So at the legislature, I think it's quite the opposite.
Okay.
That corporations sometimes are perceived as being too self-interested, and that
Okay.
nonprofit organizations actually carry a lot of weight, and private citizens who talk to their own legislator from their own district carry the most weight of all, because that is ultimately the power of the voter. And I know people feel very alienated from that process.
Yes.
I work up at the legislature and at the city council often, sometimes every day, and I really believe it's true. People who show up have a huge voice. It's
So
true.
I'm really glad you're correcting all of this misinformation that I have, because if individuals feel disenfranchised, what you're saying is, in Hawaii, nonprofits have a strong voice. And maybe an individual doesn't have to be that lone voice. Maybe they can actually volunteer with a nonprofit and be part of the movement to hear their voice in that forum.
Absolutely, and it doesn't have to be at the legislature.
Okay.
I work frequently with the nonprofit boards that support public charter schools.
Yes.
And these are also volunteers, but the Charter School Commission needs to hear from them too. These governing boards take a lot of time, and as a volunteer, you might not be thinking, oh, I want to go to a state agency meeting, at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But those are really important communications opportunities, and good decisions will be made if good information is put into making them.
Okay. Well, you're watching Life in the Law. My guest is Melissa Pavlicek from Hawaii Public Policy Advocates. We'll be back in a minute.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Hori for ThinkTech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Hori. Mahalo.
Welcome back. I'm Danielle Conway, and you're watching Life in the Law. My guest, Melissa Pavlicek from Hawaii Public Policy Advocates, is giving us a fantastic education on charitable organizations, nonprofits, and the legislative process. We're going to talk a little bit about lobbying, because that's another non-traditional approach to the legal profession. What is lobbying? You mentioned in the last segment lobbying, and everyone gets excited when they hear that.
Right.
What is it, and why is it not a dirty word?
I think lobbying is really communicating, and
Okay.
it's, influence is another word. It doesn't quite sound as nice, I think, but it's really trying to get good information to people who are making really big decisions. And so often I talk to law students or lawyers who aren't as familiar with the legislative process, and they fall into one of two categories. Either they think it's just relationships and schmoozing around and going to fancy fundraisers and having a drink with people, and there might be a little bit of that. Or they think it's sitting in a room doing testimony and crafting these wonderful arguments. And it is a little bit of that, but it's also helping understand the process, whether it's the legislature or the city council, the number one thing you need to know is the calendar. Because if you don't know what deadlines are coming up or what the legislators or decision makers are confronted with, for example, today is an important deadline, or Friday was an important deadline at the state capitol, and today is actually a recess day. But if you didn't know that the legislators had to give a 48-hour notice to hear your bill before the deadline, by the time that date came around, it's too late, and you can't do anything to fix it. So you really have to understand what the timetables are, what opportunities there are to advocate for your issue, and sometimes the legislative advocates or the members of the public who've been doing this quite a long time actually know those deadlines and rules and procedures better than the people who work up there.
Back and
sometimes
forth, yes.
it's really educating them. Yeah.
Now, this is such a fascinating area of, I'll call it practice. I think it's an area of influence, and I don't use that word in a pejorative sense. I think influence is a whole lot more amenable than, say, some of the things we're accustomed to seeing, especially at our federal Congress, and to me, that goes beyond influence when you have those kinds of really powerful lobby groups that can impose their will.
I have been participating in a work study group about the state's lobbying laws. That's been quite fascinating, and we've had a lot of conversations about what is influence and should it be curbed. And what I've taken from some of those conversations is people really want to know that there's transparency and trust in the elected officials. Yes, they know that there are members of the nonprofit or for-profit sector out here communicating and trying to influence people through communications and presenting testimony, inviting people to things. But we really want to know that our elected officials have good ethics, transparency, accountability, and they are acting in the public interest. And so as long as we have that, I think we'll feel really good.
And so there is a difference between influence and imposing one's will.
Absolutely.
Those are two different things. And there's nothing wrong with influence that is informed.
Well, I've heard a legislator who's no longer there say his job was to take this position and come somewhere in the middle. And I think that's not the elected official's job. I think it's to discern what is really the truth. Some people might not be telling the truth, and it's to discern the truth and to come up with a good policy for the most amount of people, protecting the rights of the minority and all of the other things that are inherent in making good policy decisions. So they need all the information on the table. They need the voice of nonprofit, for-profit, and lobbyists and advocates to really help illuminate where those pieces of information are.
So I want to drill down a bit, because you actually helped me do something I didn't think I could do, and that was properly submit testimony. You introduced me to a website for our Hawaii legislature.
Right. So our Hawaii legislative website is fabulous. It's very easy. You can find not only ways to submit your own testimony, but all the bills on a particular topic you're interested in, as well as everyone else who testified on it, and see what they said. It's really very easy to use. It's at hawaii.gov, and it is a great, fabulous resource. It really beats the old days of having to go down to the print shop at the Capitol and come back with a stack of bills, this high.
This high, yeah. And so you as an individual, even not as a member of a nonprofit, can actually enter the phase of influence, or the sphere of influence.
Absolutely.
Just by using that
powerful.
website.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
And even to go one step further, there is a community access room at the state capitol on the 4th floor, staffed by volunteers who are extremely knowledgeable and can show you all the little tricks on the website to make it really work for any issue that you're interested in.
The beauty of what you did for me, I was thousands of miles away. I needed to submit testimony, and you, in your expertise,
Said, here's a link.
Here's the link, and go follow that link.
Yeah.
And I was able, in a whole different time zone, to do what I needed to do with that website and get that in. So I say that because I really want those in the audience to know.
It's not something remote. Everybody can do it.
Anybody can do it.
Right.
So,
and many people are. And if you don't use that communication tool, there's a campaign to register voters called No Vote, No Grumble. If you aren't in there saying your piece, then you really don't have much room to complain about the decisions that are made.
Or you're just liking the experience of complaining.
Yeah, there you go.
So as we sort of get to the close of this wonderful discussion, what do you want to leave the audience with in terms of the role of a lawyer in both supporting nonprofits, charitable organizations, as well supporting the lobbying or influence effort?
I mean, a couple things come to mind. First of all, as an attorney, there are so many opportunities to work on any topic, subject of interest, your passion. I often read studies that say lawyers are rather unsatisfied with their profession.
Yes.
Well, they're doing the wrong thing in it, if that's how they feel, because anything that you desire, you can do it through a nonprofit, a for-profit. You can be very creative and entrepreneurial. If you're not choosing those opportunities, that's your choice.
Right.
But there are opportunities there. So I think lifting up and looking around and seeing how we can use our legal skills, our analytical skills, organizational ability, strategic thinking in many, many areas will free you up to see the law in a new way. But I think from the nonprofit sector, really trying to find attorneys who can serve in volunteer roles on the boards or as executive directors or lobbyists for the organizations, because they bring something to the table that the nonprofits need. They need those skills. They also need the knowledge base. And they need the ability to put people's passions and desires to the best and highest use. So if somebody has a passion about nursing or healthcare, you really don't want to be having them go research some legal principle to make sure that the board can do that activity. Let the lawyer do it.
And we live in this age, and this will probably be our last opportunity for comments on this. We live in this technological age where people can work from anywhere. People can connect and communicate from virtually anywhere. So does that mean that a lawyer or new law graduate could actually be doing work for any organization across the globe?
I mean, obviously there's some licensing issues and legal practice issues, but as a lawyer who's primarily not acting as legal counsel, but doing work that draws on my legal skills, I absolutely do have board members and volunteers from places beyond Hawaii who contribute to the organizations that we work with, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it would seem like a fantastic learning experience as well as a networking experience to get out there with other people who are like-minded, who are actually thinking about what they can do not just for their regional community, but for the larger global community. Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic discussion with my guest, Melissa Pavlicek. You've watched Life in the Law, and I'm Danielle Conway for the ThinkTech Law series.